History is full of silent killers, invisible enemies that hide in the air, in the water, in the food. But sometimes the killer is not hiding. Sometimes the killer is bright. It is beautiful. It glows in the dark. In the 1920s, a group of young women found the best job in the world. They worked with a magical new element. It was called radium. They were told it was safe. They were told it would make them healthy. They painted it on their faces. They painted it on their teeth. They wanted to shine, and they did shine, until their bones began to crumble, until their jaws fell apart. This is the tragic, terrifying story of the Radium Girls. The year was 1917. The United States had just entered the Great War. Men were going off to fight in the trenches of Europe. Back home, industry was booming. In Orange, New Jersey, a factory called the United States Radium Corporation was hiring. They needed delicate hands. They needed artistic precision. They were hiring young women to paint watch dials. These are not ordinary watches. They were military watches. They needed to be visible at night. The soldiers in the trenches needed to see the time in the dark without striking a match. The solution was a special paint called Undark. It was a mixture of zinc sulfide and a tiny amount of a new miracle element, radium. For a young woman in 1917, this job was a dream come true. The pay was excellent. It was 3 times what a factory girl could make elsewhere. The working conditions were clean. It was considered elite work. The girls sat in rows at long wooden tables. They were young. Many were teenagers. They were full of life. They laughed. They gossiped. They had no idea they were sitting in a death trap. The technique for painting the dials was very specific. The watch numbers were tiny. The numbers on the dials were only a few millimeters high. To get the paint inside the lines, the brush had to be incredibly sharp. A fine point was essential. The bristles would spread out after a few strokes. The girls needed a way to keep the tip pointed. The supervisors taught them a technique. It was simple. It was efficient. It was called lip dip paint. First, you put the brush in your mouth. You use your lips to shape the bristles into a sharp point. That was the lip. Then, you dip the brush into the glowing green paint. That was the dip. Then, you painted the number on the dial. That was the paint. Lip, dip, paint. Lip, dip, paint. The girls did this hundreds of times a day. With every trip to their lips, they swallowed a tiny amount of radium. It had no taste, just a slight gritty texture. They asked the managers if it was dangerous. They were assured it was perfectly safe. The managers said radium was a medicine. It was a cure-all. At the time, the world was obsessed with radium. It was the new wonder drug. People drank radium water to cure arthritis. They used radium toothpaste to make their teeth white. They used radium cosmetics to make their skin glow. The managers at the factory wore lead aprons in the lab. They handled the raw radium with tongs. But the girls? The girls were told nothing. They were left exposed. The girls loved the glow. It was magical. The dust from the paint covered everything. It settled on their hair. It settled on their clothes. It settled on their skin. By the end of the shift, the girls were literally glowing. They were called the Ghost Girls. They wore their good dresses to work, so they would sparkle on dates later that night. Some girls even painted their teeth with the substance for a laugh. They would turn off the lights and smile. Their mouths would float in the darkness. It was a party trick, a beautiful, deadly party trick. The horror began slowly. It started with Molly Maggia. Molly was one of the best painters. She was popular and vibrant. In 1922, she went to the dentist. She had a toothache. It seemed normal. A molar was loose. The dentist pulled it, but the wound didn't heal. It bled. It festered. Then, the tooth next to it started to hurt. Then the next one. Molly returned to the dentist. He touched her jaw. He was shocked. The bone felt soft. It felt spongy. He tried to examine a painful spot. He gently probed the gum. To his absolute horror, the jawbone broke under his touch. It didn't snap like a bone. It crumbled like dried ash. The infection spread. Molly was in constant agony. Her face swelled up. Her jaw was literally rotting inside her head. The dentist, in a desperate attempt to stop the spread, removed her upper jaw. He didn't need to saw it. He simply lifted it out. The bone had separated from the skull. It was dead tissue. Molly Maggia died on September 12, 1922. She was only 24 years old. The cause of death was listed as syphilis. This was a lie. It was a convenient lie for the company. It blamed the victim. It shamed her reputation. It stopped people from asking questions about the paint. But Molly didn't have syphilis. She had radiation poisoning. Her body was radioactive. Soon, other girls began to fall ill. The symptoms were consistent, and they were terrifying. It wasn't just the teeth. It was the bones. Helen Quinlan developed a pain in her legs. Her femur, the strongest bone in the body, snapped while she was walking. Grace Fryer lost her teeth. Her spine began to collapse. The girls were suffering from severe anemia. Their blood count dropped. They were pale. They were weak. They were dying. The medical community was baffled. They had never seen anything like this. This was a new disease for a new century. It was radium jaw. Here is the science of the horror. Radium behaves chemically very much like calcium. The human body uses calcium to build bones and teeth. When the girls swallowed the radium, their bodies made a tragic mistake. The body thought the radium was calcium. It took the poison and deposited it directly into the bones. It built the skeleton out of radioactive material. Once inside the bone, the radium began to decay. It fired high-energy alpha particles into the surrounding tissue. It was like having a tiny machine gun inside your marrow. It blasted the bone cells. It killed the blood supply. It destroyed the living tissue. The bones became necrotic. They died while the girls were still alive. The jawbones were the first to go because of the constant pressure of chewing and talking. The radium concentrated there. It ate the face from the inside out. The United States Radium Corporation denied everything. They hired doctors to say the girls were sick from other causes. Poor hygiene, syphilis, weak constitution. They knew the truth. Dr. Sabin von Sachiki, the inventor of the paint, knew radium was dangerous. He had seen his own fingertips turn black from handling it. But production was profitable. The war needed watches. The civilians needed clocks. Business was good, but the girls refused to go quietly. They were dying, but they were fighters. Grace Fryer led the charge. She decided to sue. It was an impossible battle. A group of dying factory girls against a powerful corporation. No lawyer wanted to take the case. It was too hard to prove. The statute of limitations had passed. Radium poisoning took years to show symptoms. The law wasn't written for slow killers. Finally, in 1927, a young lawyer named Raymond Berry agreed to help them. He filed a lawsuit on behalf of 5 women: Grace Fryer, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, Keena MacDonald, Albina Larice. They became known in the press as the Radium Girls. The trial was a media sensation. The public was horrified. These women were barely alive. Some could not walk. Some could not raise their arms to take the oath. They showed their disfigured faces to the jury. They showed the x-rays of their honeycomb bones. The company tried to delay. They dragged the legal process out. They hoped the girls would die before the trial ended. It was a cruel strategy, and it almost worked. The girls were getting weaker by the day. Their time was running out. In court, the truth about the cover-up came out. The company had commissioned a report from Harvard. The report said the paint was deadly. The company lied. They rewrote the report to say the paint was safe. They had knowingly poisoned their workers. The inventor, Dr. von Sachiki, even testified. By then, he was sick too. His teeth were falling out. The poison had come for him as well. In 1928, they reached a settlement. It wasn't a fortune. Each girl received $10,000 and a $600 annual pension, and the company agreed to pay their medical bills. It wasn't justice, but it was a victory. It was an admission of guilt. The money didn't save them. They all died young. They died in pain, but their sacrifice changed the world. Because of the Radium Girls, the laws were rewritten. The concept of occupational disease was established. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, exists partly because of their suffering. They prove that a company is responsible for the safety of its workers. They prove that you cannot trade human life for profit. The legacy of the Radium Girls is visible today, not just in labor laws, but in the graves. If you go to the cemeteries in Orange, New Jersey, or Ottawa, Illinois, and bring a Geiger counter. You will see. Stand over the grave of Molly MacGia or Grace Fryer. The needle will jump. The counter will click. Even nearly 100 years later, their bodies are still radioactive. They are still glowing in the dark earth. Their bones are still firing alpha particles. They're sending a signal from beyond the grave. A warning. The story of the Radium Girls is a lesson in corporate greed. It is a lesson in scientific hubris. We thought we could tame the elements. We thought we could use radiation like paint. We were wrong. We look back at the pictures of these women. They look happy. They look beautiful. Their hair is dusted with light. Their smiles are bright. But we know what lies beneath. We know that the brightness is a weapon. We know that the beauty is a bomb. They were told they were painting time. In a way, they were. They were painting the countdown to their own deaths. One brushstroke at a time. Lip, dip, paint. Lip, dip, die. Their jaws fell off. Their bones broke. Their lives were stolen. But their voices were never silenced. They spoke up when they were weak. They stood up when they couldn't walk. And because of them, millions of workers today are safe. We owe them a debt paid in bone and blood. The next time you see a glow-in-the-dark sticker or a luminous watch dial, remember them. Remember the taste of the grit. Remember the dentist pulling a jawbone with his bare fingers. Remember the Radium Girls, the women who shone so brightly they burned out before their time. Their light exposes the darkness of an industry that didn't care. And that light will never, ever fade away.